after watching Finding Forrester, I found myself wanting to read Avalon Landing, which is the great fictional novel written by William Forrester, which is, of course, a problem because it doesn't exist. So I did the research so that you don't have to, and today I want to talk about the top books that you should definitely read, that we need to read, but unfortunately, they don't exist. So, first of all, let's talk about Avalon Landing by William Forrester from Finding Forrester. In the film, Forrester is this kind of reclusive literary legend. Allegedly, he's based off J.D. Salinger to a certain extent, but the premise is that he wrote one great novel, and then he disappeared from public life completely. The novel is, of course, Avalon Landing. And the main character, at one point he goes and he tries to find the novel and he realizes it's checked out from every library, so it's still super duper popular. But we never actually get to read it, right? This book hangs over the entire story. William Forrester is this legend. He's one of the great, maybe he wrote the great American novel, but we can't read it. And it represents a literary greatness, artistic mystery, this kind of strange burden of writing one book so good that the world will never let you move on. Think Catch-22 as another great example. This is the imagined masterpiece, the book everyone in the fictional world seems to know, the book that made, obviously, the author immortal, but it was also the book that ruined his peace at the same time. And there's this beautiful line, which is probably from Avalon Landing, although we're not told for sure. The line is, "The rest of those who have gone before us cannot steady the unrest of those to follow." And it's really beautiful. It sounds exactly like the kind of sentence that would make me immediately buy the book, underline half of it, and mildly or severely start annoying people by quoting it left, right, and center. So in some ways, this book not existing is probably a good thing for those people, but it's also something that makes it much more interesting. Because if this book did exist, then we could actually read it. We could actually judge it, right? The moment someone actually writes it, it's in the world to be criticized. We could say, is this really the masterpiece everyone's talking about? I don't see it, or I disagree, or whatever. But as long as the fiction remains fictional, it can stay perfect. Perfect in its non-existence, and you can't say anything about it. So it can remain the great American novel, the book that you wish you could discover, the book that might change your life if you could only get your hands on it, right? But you can't. So the first book that you should read, but you can't, is Avalon Landing. The second book comes from another famous novel that features essentially all throughout famous endings, last words. And I'm talking, of course, about An Imperial Affliction from John Green's The Fault in Our Stars. Now, this is a fictional novel that the protagonist, Hazel Grace, absolutely loves. And it becomes one of the kind of emotional centers of the entire story. Now, in The Fault in Our Stars, the entire story is kind of about loving a book with unreasonable intensity. And there's this famous line in it, sometimes you read a book and it fills you with this weird evangelical zeal. And that's exactly what we see from Hazel Grace, and in our lives too, at least for some of us. Who has not become an ambassador for their favorite novel? Sometimes a book just impresses you so much and it activates you and you just want to tell everyone about it, even strangers, maybe especially strangers in some cases. But in the case of An Imperial Affliction, it represents that kind of book. For Hazel, it's not just a novel that she enjoys, it's one that she reads again and again all throughout her life. It's one that helps her make sense of her illness. It's one that helps her make sense of the life that she's living and to understand all of the complexities that come along with that. In her illness, she has fear, she has longing in the sense that stories really matter because endings matter. And this all connects to this novel. And it's also interesting because An Imperial Affliction is actually unfinished in a way that frustrates Hazel really deeply. And part of the premise of the story is she's trying to find the end, what it would be the ending of that. And that's part of why this matters as well. Because one of the great questions from The Fault in Our Stars is whether stories owe us closure. Do we need to have an ending? Is it something an author owes to us? Or could we have a book that's amazing and just in the middle stops? So yeah, I would absolutely read An Imperial Affliction. I'm not sure if I should read it, but I would read it. And that is the second one. The third one here is Misery's Child. This is from Stephen King's novel Misery. And honestly, this one's a lot darker than the first two. Well, actually, Misery's Child as a book is probably not so dark because it's a romance story, although it's probably darker than the other romance stories, but the lore around it is really dark. Well, we'll get into that in a second. But if King's novel Misery is really dark, right? It surrounds Paul Sheldon, who's this best-selling novelist, but he's famous for writing romance novels about Misery Chastain. He wants to move on from the series. He wants to write something different. And he has this car accident after he's finally finished the last manuscript. So he's able to, move on and write his next thing. And he's rescued by the most insane and terrifying woman in probably ever, Annie Wilkes, who's wonderfully portrayed by the brilliant Kathy Bates in the film version. If you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend it as well. And she claims she's his #1 fan. But unfortunately, Annie's not the kind of fan you want, right? She's like this, when she discovers that Paul killed off Misery, this happens very early in the novel, so it's not really spoiling much. That's something, that she is not going to abide. And because of that, the book Misery's Child is in progress. So basically, this is like the quintessential book that the author doesn't want to write, but is forced to write. And, probably this book wouldn't be great, although it kind of represents like a prison, right? So maybe under such circumstances, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So maybe it actually would be a good novel. But either way, it would be interesting to read. There's a number of reasons. If you've read the book, I won't spoil anything, but other reasons why you can't read it. But at the end of the day, Misery's Child is kind of like the nightmare version of audience capture. It's what would happen when the reader refuses to let a writer move on. So I think it's pretty interesting. I think it would be one I would definitely want to explore. Unfortunately, I can't. Now, the fourth one here is from a film, The Handbook for the Recently Deceased by Beetlejuice. Anyways, this is probably the most practical fiction on this list, right? I mean, who doesn't want to know, what's going to happen? But no, honestly, mostly I just want to read this one because of the pop culture value. But I think it would be very interesting to see what it says. Like, I want to know what all the rules and the procedures are. But anyways, won't go much deeper into that. The fifth one is The Murder of Gonzago from Hamlet. Now, this one to me is especially interesting because it is not exactly a book. It's a fiction within a fiction, of course, but really it's the fiction within the most famous work of literature probably ever written, or at least in the English language. It's kind of the archetypal play within a play. Maybe even the word play within a play might even come from this. I wouldn't be surprised. But Hamlet uses The Murder of Gonzago, which is also called the Mousetrap, to test whether Claudius is guilty of murdering his father. And that's really what makes this super brilliant. The fictional play is not decorative, it's really essential to the plot. Hamlet stages the fiction in order to reveal the truth. And that's a huge theme in Hamlet, right? What seems versus what is, using something that is not real to reveal what is real, which is one of the most powerful things that art can do more generally. Right? He cannot simply accuse Claudius for a variety of reasons. He doesn't have proof for one, but he uses drama to create a mirror. He places Claudius in front of a story that resembles his own crimes so well that he's able to watch how he reacts and discern the truth from that. So what I love about this is it really says something super profound about fiction and the role of fiction and the value of fiction. And that is that sometimes stories tell the truth indirectly, right? Like if you read a nonfiction book, it's going to tell you some stuff, some facts that you can learn, but fiction, it reveals what ordinary speech is incapable of revealing, the deeper truths. We might call them more meta truths, right? Something a person can deny, an accusation or something, but that accusation could be exposed in a play. Now, to be fair, we do catch glimpses from this play within Hamlet, so it's not like we don't have any access to it, but I would love to see it in its entirety, of course. And the sixth one here is The Princess Bride from The Princess Bride. Now, this one is probably the most famous, metafictional book on this list, because The Princess Bride presents itself as an abridged version of a much longer work by the fictional author S. Morgenstern, right? And so what this means is that one of the great comic fantasy novels of all time is pretending to be a shortened version of a book that never existed. and that's just wonderful. So I absolutely need to read this one. The whole framing device is part of the charm William Goldman kind of gives us in not simply telling us a story. He's like, yeah, I took out the boring parts. It's such a great opening. But anyways, he's telling us the story about reading a story and remembering a story and cutting from a bigger story so that he could pass it on. And the fictional original, of course, by Morgenstern becomes part of the joke, but it's also part of the magic, because the truth is we don't read books in isolation. We receive them through other people, people that we respect, people that we like. So yeah, I would love to read the full Morgenstern version, even if I honestly think probably the abridged version in this case is probably better. Typically, I don't like abridged versions as much, but in this case, it's all we have access to, right? So we got to read the abridged version. But I love fictional books inside fiction because sometimes a fake book can be weirdly real, right? You hear the title or a quote or the way the characters talk about it, and suddenly you feel like you know what kind of book it is. You're like, yes, that's the book that tells us that thing that we can't put our finger on, but we know is true, right? You can almost imagine finding it in a used bookstore somewhere, and finally, the last copy or something, and you can imagine reading it at exactly the right moment, and then it gives you this revelation, but there is no copy. There's no shelf. There is only the idea of the book. But those are my picks. Those are the books that you should read, except you can't. So it's tragic, but maybe that's okay, right? A real book can disappoint you. A fictional book remains perfect forever. The book that you hope exists, but for now you'll just have to get reading something that does exist. And if you want some real recommendations, you can check out some of my other videos here or here. So let me know in the comments, what fictional book do you wish you could actually read? And as always, happy reading and God bless.